General Hospital spoilers for reveal that Drew stood tall before the podium. The overhead lights catching the sharp lines of his tailored suit as he began to address the assembled media in Port Charles. It was meant to be a pivotal moment, a public reclamation of dignity. A press event carefully choreographed to frame his redemption arc and his reinstatement into the Quartermaine legacy. Reporters crowded the risers, armed with notepads, cameras, and voice recorders. Capturing every flicker of expression, every pause in Drew's speech, every carefully crafted word. From the outside, it looked like the perfect political and corporate theater. But beneath the surface, tension hung like a storm cloud. The crowd, though civil, seemed coiled with an energy that hinted something more than a press statement was about to unfold. Drew, unaware of the coming storm, continued to speak with a calculated optimism, about second chances, rebuilding trust, and honoring the Quartermaine name. Then, without any warning, Tracy emerged from the wings, stepping into the spotlight with a steely calm that sent an immediate chill through the room. Her presence was both commanding and unnerving. She moved with the authority of someone who had seen it all, done it all, and didn't mind burning it all down again. Drew faltered mid-sentence, his eyes catching hers. Sensing that whatever came next wasn't part of the script they'd rehearsed. The crowd turned in unison, microphones redirected, lenses zoomed in. The moment Tracy took the stage, the air shifted. She didn't hesitate, didn't soften her words or give Drew the dignity of a private confrontation. In front of the flashing cameras, the eager media, and stunned family members, she dropped the bombshell with icy precision. "I have to tell you the truth," she announced, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "Drew Kane has been having an affair with Nina Reeves." Gasps burst from the audience. A journalist dropped her pen. Another reporter's camera light flickered to life as if the chaos needed more illumination. Brooke Lynn, standing to the side, clutched Harrison's arm in disbelief, whispering, "Oh no," with wide eyes, while Martin's mouth parted in stunned silence. Kai, standing near the media booth, looked completely blindsided. Frozen in place. The crowd began to swell forward, reporters now shouting questions in rapid-fire bursts. When did this begin? Was Nina complicit in corporate sabotage? Does Carly know? What about Willow? Drew's expression hardened into something unreadable, equal parts fury and panic. His grip tightened on the podium as he realized that the narrative had been snatched from his hands, twisted beyond repair. The redemption arc had been hijacked by a revelation that was now bigger than any ketamine allegation or PR campaign. Tracy had pulled the rug from under him with surgical precision. And now every eye in the room saw not a man of honor making a return, but a figure cloaked in betrayal, secrecy, and scandal. Chaos overtook the event. Tracy remained composed, her expression unmoved by the eruption she had just caused. She knew this moment would redefine Drew in the eyes of the town, and she didn't flinch. The room buzzed with overlapping voices and aggressive questioning. Microphones pushed toward Drew's face, demanding a response. He opened his mouth, but the roar of voices drowned him out. The press conference that had begun as a celebration of return had now devolved into a media bloodbath. It was no longer about Drew reclaiming his name, it was about survival. As Drew stood beneath the harsh lights, caught in the crossfire of judgment and betrayal, the realization dawned that this wasn't just a public relations crisis. This was a war, one that would have ripple effects through every family connected to the Quartermaines, the Corinthos Empire, and every corporate seat of power in Port Charles. Tracy's calculated revelation had weaponized the truth, and Drew was no longer the man with the message. He was the message, and the town would never see him the same way again. Tracy was no longer playing by any unspoken family rules. She had shifted into full-scale demolition mode, targeting Drew with an icy, calculated resolve that made even seasoned power players in Port Charles uneasy. What began as a carefully crafted press conference meant to restore Drew's public image and solidify his return to the Quartermaine name had quickly transformed into a battleground. And Tracy stood at the center of it with her blade already drawn. She wasn't merely airing personal grievances or exacting petty revenge. No, Tracy was systematically dismantling every advantage, Every entitlement, every vestige of power that Drew had managed to gather during his turbulent return. The public revelation of Drew's affair with Nina was not an end, it was merely the ignition of a much larger plan designed to strip him of all influence and dignity. Both within the Quartermaine estate and throughout the larger Port Charles ecosystem. The ramifications of her actions reached far beyond scandal. They threatened the very legitimacy of Drew's professional pursuits, his corporate alliances, and his already fragile public trust. Tracy was leveraging not just Drew's indiscretions but also the emotional fatigue of a town tired of second chances and repeated betrayals. She presented herself as the gatekeeper of the Quartermaine legacy, positioning Drew as a liability who had jeopardized not just the family name, but the ethical standing of every institution he touched, from ELQ to the hospital board. In doing so, she began methodically stripping away the protections that had shielded Drew from harsher consequences, exposing him to the full wrath of legal scrutiny, boardroom politics, and media condemnation. This wasn't just about punishment, it was annihilation. Tracy had weaponized truth, perception, and influence, turning them into surgical instruments to sever Drew's access to everything he once took for granted. Family loyalty, company equity, moral authority, each was being carved away with chilling precision. Drew, who had once stood on the cusp of a comeback, now found himself dangling over the precipice of ruin. Each of Tracy's revelations pushing him closer to the edge. She was relentless, making it clear that no apology, no rebuttal, no corporate spin could reverse the damage. Her actions weren't impulsive, they were the result of months of silent calculation, observing Drew's missteps, storing ammunition, and waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it all in front of the world. What made the situation even more terrifying was the eerie calm with which Tracy executed her plan. There was no shouting, no drama, just devastating facts delivered with brutal calm. She had turned Drew into a cautionary tale, a man who betrayed the very allies who had protected him. A man who used family name for convenience but ignored its code of conduct. In her eyes, he didn't just deserve to fall, he needed to fall, and hard. For the family to survive the reputational bloodletting his actions had brought upon them. Now, in the wake of her public takedown, the ripples were being felt everywhere. Drew's business deals began unraveling. Shareholders pulled back. Legal advisors issued warnings. Even his allies began distancing themselves, wary of being tainted by proximity. The media fed hungrily on the unfolding scandal, painting Drew not as a misunderstood hero, but as a manipulative opportunist caught in a web of lies and infidelity. Nina, too, became collateral damage, her credibility with both the press and her allies disintegrating as Tracy's accusations painted her not only as Drew's accomplice but as a threat to every institution she touched. And yet, Tracy wasn't done. She had more cards to play, evidence, testimonies, and surveillance footage rumored to be in her possession. Each revelation was designed not just to destroy Drew's reputation but to ensure that no one ever again dared to cross her, or think they could manipulate the Quartermaine dynasty without consequence. What began as a press conference had evolved into a full-scale legacy war, and Tracy wasn't merely winning, she was rewriting the rules. For Drew, the nightmare wasn't that he had been exposed. The true horror was that Tracy had calculated every step, and the path forward no longer belonged to him at all. A disaster was no longer looming, it was already here, unfolding in real time. And it bore Tracy's signature. Tracy had always been a master of calculated chaos, wielding her influence with surgical precision. And now she was executing one of the most disruptive plans Port Charles had witnessed in years. Her decision to go public with Drew's affair wasn't just about scandal, it was about dismantling a power structure, shifting the balance within the Quartermaine empire, and reclaiming control in a way that would leave no room for doubt about who truly commanded the narrative. But what began as a single revelation quickly mutated into something far more volatile. Unraveling lives, reputations, and relationships with each passing hour. The public press conference, meant to be a celebration of Drew's reintegration into the Quartermaine fold, had instead become a theater of humiliation, betrayal, and shifting allegiances, all orchestrated by Tracy's hand. As Drew stood stunned at the podium, surrounded by flashing lights, reporters, And cameras catching every tremor in his voice. Tracy's calm, clinical delivery of his secret exposed not just his infidelity but the facade of stability he had tried so desperately to maintain. Brooke Lynn stood frozen as the words left Tracy's lips. Her heart pounding not out of surprise, because on some level she had always suspected her grandmother was capable of this, but out of sheer disbelief that it was happening now, in public. With her name and her fiancé's future hanging in the balance. Her position on the hospital board, her delicate role at deception. Her aspirations to lead without relying on family scandal, all of it now risked being drowned in the echo of Tracy's calculated betrayal. Chase reached for her hand. But even his reassuring presence couldn't stop the anxiety spiraling inside her. This wasn't just about Drew. It was about the entire family being dragged into a storm they hadn't seen coming. A storm Tracy had summoned with full intent and zero remorse. Chase, whose integrity as a detective and a man had always been his guiding compass, now found himself caught between his loyalty to Brooke Lynn and his growing discomfort with the way her family played politics with people's lives. What made it worse was the realization that Tracy hadn't just targeted Drew out of spite or retribution, she had done it as part of a larger design to recalibrate who held power within the Quartermaine circle. And in doing so, she had pulled Brooke Lynn, and by extension, Chase, into a web of dangerous implications. Headlines now speculated about Brooke Lynn's role in the scandal. Was she complicit? Was she the next heir apparent being groomed for greater influence? Or worse, was she being set up to fall when the time came for Tracy to name a new successor? Inside the Quartermaine estate, whispers had grown louder. Monica had retreated into a stunned silence. Ned watched with a mixture of pride and dread, knowing his mother's tactics better than most. Olivia tried to mediate. But her pleas for civility were drowned by the thunder of Tracy's maneuvering. Brooke Lynn and Chase, once seen as the stabilizing force in the family, were now being seen as wild cards, young, ambitious, and potentially dangerous if they chose to retaliate or distance themselves. And yet, retaliate was the last thing on Brooke Lynn's mind. Her focus now was survival. Rebuilding. Defending what she had worked so hard to claim, her own voice, her own influence, her own identity separate from the manipulative legacy she had been born into. But the cost was rising. Fans and critics alike began speculating whether Brooke Lynn would be pressured to resign from the board. Her relationship with Chase, once a symbol of love over legacy, now became the subject of gossip columns wondering if the stress would break them apart. Tracy's revelation had ignited more than just scandal, it had triggered a reckoning for the Quartermaines, one that was exposing every fracture, every secret, every ambition still hiding in the shadows. What no one fully realized yet was that Tracy's plan didn't end with Drew's public humiliation. That was merely the first strike. She had dossiers prepared. She had board members under pressure. She had quietly aligned with Nina, despite their mutual contempt, for the sole purpose of eliminating Drew from the Quartermaine boardroom and positioning someone she could control in his place. And if that meant manipulating Brooke Lynn to do it, so be it. Tracy wasn't playing for revenge. She was playing for legacy. And she was willing to risk everything to reshape it before her time ran out. The most devastating part? Brooke Lynn could see it. Every choice Tracy made, every carefully timed statement, every smirk during Drew's downfall, it all pointed to a truth Brooke Lynn had fought to avoid. Her grandmother wasn't just acting out of spite. She was laying a foundation for the future, and if Brooke Lynn didn't fall in line, she would be next. Meanwhile, Chase, trying to protect the woman he loved, found himself at odds with his own principles. He couldn't stand by and watch the media crucify Brooke Lynn for sins she didn't commit. But every attempt to speak up was met with warnings, from his captain, from his colleagues, from his own conscience. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a political minefield. And one wrong move could not only end his career but destroy what little peace remained between him and Brooke Lynn. And so the silence grew heavier in the Quartermaine halls. The space between Brooke Lynn and Chase widened, not from lack of love, but from the gravity of everything around them pulling them in opposite directions. Tracy, undeterred, moved her pieces across the board. Drew, broken but not yet defeated, began plotting his own counterstrike. And the rest of Port Charles watched, transfixed. As a family that had always been known for drama stepped fully into a new era of war, quiet, calculated, and entirely personal. In the end, the question wasn't whether Drew would survive the scandal. The real question was who Tracy had chosen as her next target. Because once the curtain fell on this chapter, someone else's secrets would be next. And Brooke Lynn, standing at the intersection of legacy and identity, would have to decide which mattered more, surviving her family or becoming its next architect. Cody had been watching the Quartermain storm unfold with the calm intensity of someone who had waited too long for an opportunity to strike, and now, that opportunity had finally arrived. The scandal involving Drew and Nina, ignited by Tracy's explosive press conference, had sent ripples of chaos through Port Charles. But where others saw destruction, Cody saw leverage. With Drew reeling and the Quartermain family fractured, Cody began maneuvering himself into a position of quiet influence, cloaked beneath the guise of concern and loyalty. While his real intentions simmered just beneath the surface. He wasn't out for sympathy or redemption, he was out for control. For proof that he could dismantle the illusion of invincibility that Drew had carefully curated for months. Every word Drew had uttered at that podium, every flashbulb capturing his humiliation, became ammunition in Cody's silent war, a campaign driven by vengeance, ambition, and the deep-seated belief that Drew's fall was long overdue. What made the moment more dangerous was Cody's intimate knowledge of the inner workings of Drew's operations. He had seen the masks, the charm, the manipulation. And he had witnessed firsthand the quiet devastation Drew had left behind in his quest for power. Cody wasn't just reacting to the affair with Nina, he was responding to months of calculated betrayal. The way Drew had pushed people like Willow and Sasha into corners and tried to rewrite narratives to serve his own image. Now, as those carefully spun threads began to unravel, Cody made it his mission to ensure they never got tied back together. He began whispering truths to the right people, subtle reminders to reporters, board members, and business allies about Drew's moral failures and his reckless decisions, all under the veil of faux concern. But this wasn't gossip. This was strategy. Cody was planting seeds that would grow into doubt, and doubt, once rooted in a place like Port Charles, was nearly impossible to kill. Every step Cody took was laced with intention. He offered his support to Brooke Lynn, hinting that perhaps she deserved better leadership within her family. He reached out to Jason under the pretense of concern for Sonny's future, subtly connecting Drew's failures to larger vulnerabilities in their circle. Most dangerously, he found time to speak with Olivia, casually at first, but carefully pressing her to consider what it would mean if Drew's decisions had endangered the Quartermain brand beyond repair. Cody wasn't trying to destroy a man in a single blow. He was building a slow, layered collapse. Because the more Drew tried to patch the damage, the more he exposed the cracks. And Cody was going to be there to shine the spotlight on every fracture. At the same time, Cody was haunted by his own motivations. This wasn't just about power or revenge. There was a personal stake, an emotional knot tied tightly to the idea that Drew had taken too much, manipulated too many, and left too many hearts in ruins without consequence. Cody couldn't stomach the hypocrisy. Drew played the hero while silencing the wreckage behind him, and now, finally, the town was seeing through the mask. But Cody's pursuit wasn't without risk. He knew that aligning too obviously against Drew could backfire. If people thought he was exploiting the scandal, he'd lose their trust. That's why his tactics remained veiled, subtle, surgical. He wasn't the storm, he was the shadow behind it. As the days unfolded, and Drew's silence grew heavier, Cody's influence grew in its place. He began to earn trust in unlikely places, from Tracy, who found his candor oddly refreshing, from Valentine, who appreciated someone willing to speak uncomfortable truths, even from Willow, who began to see Cody not just as a bystander, but as someone who understood the full cost of betrayal. And through it all, Cody kept his eyes on the prize, not just Drew's downfall, but the reshaping of the entire power dynamic in Port Charles. Because if Drew fell, others would rise. And Cody was determined to be one of them. Not by brute force, not by shouting the loudest, but by becoming the one voice everyone had overlooked until it was too late. In the ashes of the press conference, where Drew's name once carried power and respect, Cody was already positioning himself as a new kind of presence, quiet, deliberate, dangerous. The affair with Nina was just the spark. The firestorm was only beginning. And when it cleared, Cody would be standing, not just as a survivor, but as a force to be reckoned with in a town where secrets were currency and timing was everything. The moment Tracy made the announcement that Drew and Willow were no longer welcome at the Quartermain estate, it sent shockwaves through Port Charles and marked a definitive unraveling of what little stability Drew had left. The mansion, once a symbol of legacy and privilege, had become the battlefield where truth collided with betrayal. And now, under Tracy's unflinching authority, it became the stage for exile. Her decision wasn't made out of impulse, it was the culmination of months of quiet observation, suppressed fury, and an unwavering belief that Drew had defiled not just the name but the spirit of the Quartermain legacy with his calculated deceit and personal indiscretions. Kicking him out was more than a punishment. It was a declaration that no one, not even a man who had clawed his way back into the family name, could escape accountability once his mask had shattered. Willow, caught in the emotional crossfire, had little time to process the enormity of what had transpired. The woman who had sacrificed so much in the name of love and second chances was now being punished for aligning herself with a man whose betrayal ran deeper than she'd ever imagined. She stood in the foyer, staring at the family portraits that no longer reflected her place among them, feeling the walls tighten around her like a home turning hostile. It wasn't just the eviction that struck her, it was the crushing realization that Tracy had seen through Drew long before she had. That the affair with Nina was merely the tip of an iceberg that had been growing silently beneath the surface, and now, everything was cracking under its weight. And in that moment, Willow wasn't just losing a home, she was losing the illusion that love could survive betrayal, that redemption could come without consequence. The tension between Drew and Willow became undeniable as they packed their things in silence, neither daring to speak about the elephant in the room. That their relationship had already begun to die the moment Drew decided to betray her trust with the one woman she hated most. It wasn't just infidelity, it was humiliation. Drew had allowed Nina, of all people, into his heart, into his bed, while Willow was clinging to threads of hope and loyalty. And now, with Tracy's actions exposing what he refused to admit, Drew found himself isolated. Not just from the Quartermains, but from Willow, whose gaze now held more distance than love. As they left the mansion grounds, the weight of disgrace followed them like a storm cloud. Drew, once the polished figure of perseverance and resilience, now looked like a man undone, dragging behind him the remnants of a shattered image. And Willow, once so fierce in protecting her family, now walked away with her children and no clear sense of direction, forced into a reality where she had to question every decision that had brought her to this point. The eviction was more than symbolic, it was a loud, public rejection that made clear that Drew's manipulations would no longer be tolerated. And with Tracy wielding the full might of the Quartermain legacy behind her, there would be no quiet reconciliation. This was war. The implications of Tracy's actions began to spread quickly throughout town. Michael was the first to hear, his jaw tightening as he realized just how far the consequences of Drew's betrayal had spiraled. Sasha, too, kept her distance, unsure how to comfort Willow in a moment where even friendship felt like an intrusion. Olivia, torn between family and loyalty, found herself questioning whether she should have seen this collapse coming. And for Tracy, watching it all unfold from the mansion window, there was no remorse, only resolve. In her eyes, this wasn't cruelty. It was justice. It was the necessary purging of rot from the family tree. Now cast out, Drew and Willow were forced to confront a bleak and uncertain future. With nowhere to go and no allies rushing to their defense, they became nomads in a town where reputation was everything. The scandal had rendered them toxic. And no amount of apologies could erase the image of Tracy's cold dismissal or the echo of her words, sharp, final, unrelenting. Drew had gambled everything on secrecy and lost. And Willow, in trying to rebuild her life with him, now had to start again from ruins. Yet beneath the devastation, something darker brewed. Willow, no longer shielded by comfort or status, began to shift. The rage she once buried under kindness started to surface, not in fits of anger, but in a chilling clarity. She had trusted Drew, fought for him, forgiven him, and now she was being punished for it. She didn't cry as they drove away from the mansion. She didn't look back. Instead, her mind began to race with thoughts she never dared to entertain, thoughts of retribution. Of reclaiming her life on her own terms, even if it meant becoming someone she once feared becoming. Someone unafraid to destroy what hurt her. The fall of Drew and Willow wasn't just a scandal. It was a transformation. Tracy had drawn a line in the sand, and now, on the other side of that line stood two people with nothing left to lose. And in Port Charles, people with nothing left to lose were often the ones who became most dangerous. The Quartermain estate no longer belonged to them, but the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because sometimes, being cast out isn't the end, it's the beginning of something far more unpredictable. And Tracy, in her ruthless efficiency, may have just awakened a version of Willow and Drew the world wasn't ready for.